Good evening, I'm Cathy Lewis. Tonight, the first of a two-part look at the business of lawmaking in the Commonwealth. The gavel has fallen on the 2009 Virginia General Assembly session, and lawmakers are back home, delegates preparing for fall elections. By contrast, North Carolina's legislature is also starting work in January, did start work in January, that is, and they'll stay at it for about 6 months before adjourning. We'll consider that contrast. We'll look at what was accomplished in the Virginia session, what's left to be done, how the political landscape may change this fall, and how the nation's financial distress is hitting home. And that specifically, the testimony of the head of AIG, is the subject of a final thought I'll leave you with before the end of the broadcast. First, though, we are delighted to have with us tonight Delegate Glenn Oder from the Peninsula, the 94th District, State Senator John Miller from District 1, a political science professor at Christopher Newport University, Quentin Kidd, many districts covered there, and Daily Press reporter Kimball Payne, who has the hard job of covering all of them. Good to have all of you with us tonight. Thanks for being here. What a session. You came into it with a lot of money worries, Senator Miller.
Well, the budget deficit going into January was estimated by the governor at 2.9. And then as we got new figures in February, it was almost $4 billion worth of a hole that had to be plugged. And thankfully, we plugged it without raising anybody's taxes, which is always a good thing. And we did it without making any permanent cuts.
But of course, you couldn't have probably done it without the stimulus money.
Well, the stimulus money saved it, and
yeah.
we were able to eliminate the cuts that the governor had proposed for education, public safety, and some other areas. Yeah. But without that stimulus money, we would be really reducing 7,000 jobs in the Commonwealth.
Wow. Kimball Payne, you spent a lot of time covering this session, all of the committee meetings and whatnot, and I've seen a lot of your writing on this that just defined it exactly that way, that this was a money session, that at the end of the day, that's really what started it and what finished it.
Well, it had been for 6-8 months.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw the writing on the wall when all this stuff happened with Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, I mean, all this different stuff, and money, revenue generation, what just wasn't filling up in the coffers of the Commonwealth. And so what you saw was, I mean, Governor Kane was pretty adamant that, you know, we're going to have these cuts. We don't know how much stimulus is going to help us. It ended up coming in and sort of allowing for some of these basic cuts, but not the higher and deeper level that everyone was worried about. And yeah, Governor Kane made that point. 7,000 jobs was what he said in terms of, you know, what probably would have been lost if you didn't have this money coming into the Commonwealth. $4 billion, $4.8 billion, something to the tune of that.
And of course, Senator Fred Quayle said we can't count on the stimulus money forever. So at some point, 2 years from now, there might be a different story to tell here, Delegate Oder.
Well, we have to hope that the economy returns. I mean, that's really what we've done. We've just starved off the inevitable. If the economy doesn't return, then, of course, even harder decisions are going to have to be made. But right now, we're focused on, we've had a lot of economic opportunities that have been announced over in the Newport News area. I'm sure we're going to see some more of that.
Yeah, you really have had a couple of big ones announced there.
We have.
And as you think about this issue, Quentin Kidd, one of the things that I have asked you about before, and you've said you really are complimentary of the legislature this time around for coming together around these money issues, and that given all of this, it was a pretty productive session all in all.
Well, and it would have been really difficult to have many fights over new programs or increased spending. There just wasn't the money. You know, in a funny way, I think, you know, sitting at a distance like I do, I think the legislature was sort of waiting to see what would happen with the federal stimulus money, and I like to call that a get-out-of-jail-free card. If it weren't for that, Lord knows, I don't know that the House and the Senate could have agreed on a budget, and it would have been left to the governor then to make cuts and tough decisions.
Sure. And any of you, feel free to jump in on this. I know there are some governors and some state legislatures where they've said, we don't want that stimulus money. We don't think we need it. We don't think we want it. Was there any of that this time around in the Virginia General Assembly?
I think the main course that we heard was, don't start using this to build something that you're going to have to tear down in 2 years when this money is gone. Yeah. Don't think that, you know, this means you can greenlight your pet project. And I think there was a worry that you would just be passing this down the line, or maybe even building something that would have to just get cut in 2 years. But I think another important thing to remember is, you know, we've had a lot of doom and gloom, but when you look at the state of the economies in other states, you look at California, you're not even being able to pay their employees at one point. I mean, Virginia did well by this, by being, you know, fiscally restrained, by, you know, having that balanced budget, and I think that helped it.
As a point of comparison, California's budget gap was as large as Virginia's entire budget at one point. And so, you know, I think that's a good point. I think some other states are suffering much more than Virginia is suffering. And I think Virginia is fiscally well managed. And because of that, the budget cuts were handled in a much different way than they were in California, where, you know, programs were cut midstream and money taken back, for example.
And what we've got to keep in mind, and the note of caution in all this, is that when we go back for the next budget, we're going to potentially face another $3 to $4 billion deficit without any stimulus money to plug it in. So unless this economy turns around quickly, we're going to be back facing devastating cuts. And so I've been clear to tell all the folks that I can that we're not out of the woods. We bought ourselves some time.
And you still need that B plan.
And you still need to be ready to make some adjustments.
Kimball Payne, I remember early on in the session we were talking about the prospect of a smoking ban, and I remember we joked about, oh, come on, this is Virginia, that'll never happen.
I know. No, I was definitely one of those folks who
silly us, huh?
I wasn't going to believe it until I saw it.
Yeah.
But you know, you look at stepping back and looking at it now. I mean, you can kind of see why it makes sense, why someone like, you know, Speaker Howe is willing to step to the table in terms of their caucus and their power and the upcoming elections. I mean, you can look and see where these breaks started to happen. And it always had, I mean, Kaine had been throwing this at the wall trying to get it to stick forever, and it just hadn't happened and hadn't happened, mostly because of the House of Delegates and Democrats and Republicans in the House of Delegates. But so, this year it was.
Well,
what was it that
turned? From that perspective, many times it was really a House in the House. It was Republicans that were putting the bill in. Now, of course, it was the House Republican leadership and so forth, where the bill was getting caught in a subcommittee and wasn't getting out. But you know, there were Republicans in the House that were pushing this bill every year. John Cosgrove, myself, Delegate Hamilton. We all put those bills in. I've put in the bill. The interesting thing is, and a lot of people think that that what we did was we passed a smoking ban. We didn't pass a smoking ban. What we passed was a smoking bill. If we passed a smoking ban, we would have said there is no smoking in restaurants, no smoking in public places, and so forth. The bill is very specific. If you are a restaurant owner and you still want to have smoking in your restaurant, you can under two conditions. The first is you have to build a separate room with separate ventilation, and you can still have smoking in your restaurant, or you can become a private club. And the bill is very specific and describes how you can set up a private club and you can have memberships and so forth. And they could be, you know, very, very minimal memberships. I mean,
right.
a dollar or whatever, and you get your first drink $1 off or something. So it's possible under the bill, if you strongly believe that your
sure.
restaurant should, you still can. But the good news is that we believe the vast majority of all the restaurants are going to be smoke-free by December the 1st of this year. And it's really exciting that the governor and the Speaker of the House were able to get together to come up with that compromise bill.
Was the bill satisfactory to you, Delegate Odor? Were you happy with the way it came out?
I think, like a lot of us, it would have been very, very nice if we could have done more. If we could have, I mean, smoking is an issue that
right.
that affects so many people, and it would have been. I mean, the workers are still exposed to it. You know, that are restaurant workers and so forth.
At least you have the choice about whether to work in one of those
places. But you have a choice as whether or not you want to work there. I mean, the truth of the matter is very interesting. If the bill polls, I mean, the idea polls at about 70%. I actually did a poll before I left the General Assembly session. There was a telephone town hall conference, and I described the smoking bill to the people that were on there. 88% agreed with what the legislature did.
Wow.
Well, it's significantly higher than what it traditionally polls.
And Senator Miller, how about you? Did this bill do it for you, the one that came through?
Ideally, if we had a smoking ban rather than a smoking bill, that would have been better. I served on the special Senate committee that dealt with all the smoking legislation and listened to the fact that 1,000 Virginians are going to die through exposure every year to secondhand smoke. So it is necessary that we take these health concerns and make sure that we protect the workers and the people in Virginia. I wish it had gone farther, but I think this is the best we can do.
Well, I don't think you want to hold out for anything being perfect, because when you look at the reality on the ground, this is never going to be, you know, enforced strictly. I mean, what is it, $25 fine for your first violation? I mean, this is something that is trying to change the overall culture. I mean, you've still got people, there's some 7-Elevens that you go in and someone's smoking behind the counter. I mean, that's illegal, but, you know, they're places that are going to get around this law. They're patios. I mean, this is trying to change, jump from having a mainstream smoking restaurant culture to a mainstream non-smoking restaurant culture.
And Quentin, could you say that these 4 Virginias we're talking about may have had a role in this?
There's a very strong political undercurrent here, and it points right to the fall elections, and it looks back at the most recent elections. And I think the Speaker is trying to move the conservative caucus in the House of Delegates, the Republican conservative part of the Republican caucus, a little bit on this. There's, as Glenn noted, there's strong polling on it. across Virginia, people really support it. And the reason the governor and others kept throwing it forward is that every time the House seemed to resist it, it rebounded to the benefit of Democrats. And I think the Speaker was saying, look, we can take this issue off the table. At the same time, we can make Republicans look a little bit more progressive, a little bit more concerned about things that a majority of Virginians are concerned about. So I think it's not only changing a culture when it comes to voting, but it's changing a perception about Republicans in the General Assembly as well, looking to the fall elections.
Especially in Northern Virginia.
Well,
especially in Northern Virginia.
And I think you can see a lot of issues in the General Assembly this past session that did that. I mean, first off, we started off with recorded votes in subcommittees in the House. That was a big issue. You saw the Speaker give on that. We had video streaming. The Senate's done that for a while, but we haven't done that in the House. We actually take the video stream that we do in the Capitol and we send it out now over the internet. We did the smoking bill that we just talked about, and we even tightened the restrictions on payday lending. I did not think we were going to be addressing payday lending again this year, but we actually even tightened those restrictions. So, I mean, there was significant movement in many, many directions. The Hampton Roads Transportation Authority had been bottled up, eliminating that had been bottled that up in a House committee. We actually got that out and got that passed.
And you know, oddly enough, Barack Obama helped the Speaker. If it weren't for that stimulus package, the House and the Senate would have had to negotiate over budget cuts and revenue. And I think that would have hurt the Speaker's ability to pull the Republican, the conservative part of the Republican caucus in the House over a little bit, because it took some of those issues off the table.
That's really
delayed them, probably, but it took them off the table for this year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The other piece of this smoking issue that didn't get done was the governor proposed to double the state's tax on cigarettes to 60 cents a pack. And that's certainly an interesting proposal to throw out there. Do you ever see an increase in the cigarette tax coming? I mean, was the problem with this the amount, or that it was such a tremendous increase when you think about doubling it, even though Virginia still has one of the lowest cigarette tax rates in the country?
I think going in, there was a realization that a tax would never get through the House of Delegates.
Just that.
And so...
Well, Cathy, we just increased it from 2.5 cents to 30 cents. I mean, that's a pretty significant cigarette tax increase. I don't know of anybody else in the nation that had that big of a jump in a cigarette. And
even though it's overall still one of the lowest in the nation.
Well, then everybody else around us started ratcheting us up and so forth. But we just increased the cigarette tax, and it got through the House of Delegates from 2.5 cents to 30 cents a pack.
So that was enough for now.
For enough right now.
And if the budget numbers start coming back, this is going to be something that is going to be on the table. I mean, just because it's a revenue stream that, even though it's a tax, which is, they're always unpopular in Richmond, it's seen as a sin tax. It's one of these things. Well, you don't have to smoke. And you have the argument
earlier about moving this social conversation along around.
Well, and you have the argument about Philip Morris, but Philip Morris and some of these cigarette makers are doing the majority of their business internationally. I mean, they are just, it's not like this is suddenly going to cripple their business because they're pumping cigarettes into the international market.
Their presence in Virginia is largely through the ports anymore, as opposed to statewide.
I held 4 town meetings prior to the General Assembly in each of the cities I represent and asked people, would you support a cigarette tax? And 3 of the 4, 75% of the people said yes, and the other was about 50-50. But clearly, the people realize the need because it is dealing with it's a healthcare issue.
And you don't want to use New York City as a model, but you see what happens in New York City. You go up there and a pack of cigarettes is $10, $11. I mean, it's insane, but it's just seen as something where you've got a majority of people who are going to say, well, you know what, I'm not affected, while at the same time you've got people that are still going to be buying the cigarettes, because it's not like, smokers are going to suddenly give up for an extra 30 cents.
We're talking about what happened at the General Assembly this past time around in Virginia. At the start of the show, we talked about this, the fact that in North Carolina they started their legislative session around the same time Virginia did, and theirs typically run in every other year about 6 months. And that it's just an interesting conversation to talk about because we have a very part-time legislature because everybody has jobs to do. I mean, if you had to live on what you make at the General Assembly, I'm guessing that might not be so great.
To be a reporter?
To be a part-time reporter.
Well done. Well done. But we do come back to this issue from time to time, which has to do with how we go about doing the people's business. And in Virginia, we've opted for this sort of strategy.
We have a citizen legislature in Virginia. We have it because there's a long history in Virginia. There's a deep tradition in Virginia that goes all the way back to Jefferson about the role of citizens in their governance. Many other states have professional legislatures who are paid as if it were a full-time job like members of Congress. And there are benefits and downsides to having a citizen legislature. The benefits are that you know, the senator and delegate live in the neighborhood and are around the people they have to represent all the time. And if I had to say, I would prefer that, as opposed to somebody who's in Sacramento 11 and a half months of the year, or might just live there effectively, even if they have an address back, you know, wherever their district is.
What do you think, Leonard? I mean, would you like to do this more often than you do, or are you thinking this is about all I can handle? Thank you very much.
I don't think I could put any more hours into it, whether I was paid full time or not.
Yeah.
It's full time,
yeah.
And it's very, very interesting to have somebody ask you what's your full time job, and you go, well, you have two full time jobs, because you really do have to have a second income in order to make it. It's really the toughest part about the job. It's what I call having an economic model to make it work. You're either rich and you can do this on the side, or you have a business that allows you to leave, or you have a spouse that works, or you have a retirement account. I mean, you almost have to.
It really does limit people, doesn't it?
Or quite frankly, we've had legislators that lived at home with their parents. I mean, you know, and they just stayed at home, and that's what they did. I mean, you have to have an economic model which allows you to spend this much time doing something and make $17,640 a year. You know,
and in your case, you get to run every 2 years for that.
And we run every 2 years. And I think there is, your question was how I feel about it. I think there's wisdom both in the income, in the level of the income, and also in the fact that I have to run every 2 years. It's very, very important, I think, that we have at least one house that constantly has to stay in touch with the public. And I appreciate that. I asked for the job. I'm not going to complain about it.
Well, you look at the questions of full-time legislature. I think the biggest argument, or the best argument that I've heard for this being faulty, is that you lose a lot of intellectual firepower by having this done at tax time. It was an argument that Vivian Page made.
Right, sure.
Because those folks are so involved in their full-time jobs during that January and February time frame, it's just not realistic to
think. So you're not going to have financial professionals.
So you lose that
able
sector,
to do
which
that,
I think is a very
demonstrated is probably good to have there.
That's true, and I think that's a sound argument. But at the same time, you don't want I don't think you want everyone with this kind of focus full-time in Richmond. I mean, if you can imagine 11 months in Richmond with this kind of, I think the intensity and the speed of it, there's a benefit. You have to be lean, so things just fall away. I mean, it forces the really important issues, the really, you know, socially and the ones that are resonating with the public. It forces them to the forefront.
Interesting.
Part-time legislatures, states that have them tend to have stronger governors as well, and tend to have a more empowered bureaucratic infrastructure, simply because the legislature is not there, say in Richmond in this case, all the time, and so the governor simply has more authority and more power in that context.
Where are you on this, Senator Miller?
Well, I covered the General Assembly when senators and delegates didn't have offices.
Right.
I mean, you went to your Senate desk or your House of Delegates desk, and that was it. You didn't have an aide. Now we've got a small staff of one to help us out, and I was there when it only met every 2 years, and before it started going to the other session. I think it's good that we are back home most of the year, and we're able to interact with our constituents. I think we could lengthen the session a little bit. 3,000 bills in 45 days is a lot of activity, but I think there's a compromise where you can still keep the citizen legislature aspect of it, but still give a little more attention to the job.
So you
at
have
hand.
one aide,
Yes.
is that right, to help you? And do you?
Yes.
One aide. So,
Yes.
but that's a lot of bills for two people to go through. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And that person also has to help with constituent service and that sort of thing. So
That's right.
when somebody calls and says,
And now, you know, today with emails, I mean, we get hundreds of emails a day, and you try to answer all of them. So there's that aspect. There are things that are going on today in the General Assembly that were not known 20 years ago.
Sure.
And so it is.
That brings up an interesting point about the expectations of constituents, because with email now, do you find that people are looking, oh, what do you mean, Senator Miller? I just texted you, or I just emailed you. I mean, are they expecting you to have that level of responsiveness?
Oh yes.
Really quick.
I mean,
yeah.
when you send out a communication, they expect a response. And,
I see.
And I personally answer everybody.
Yeah.
It takes me a while to get to them all, but I do respond. So.
And of course, this year, speaking of technology, you all have had, you mentioned it earlier, the streaming of your activities there. Did that change? Do you notice whether that changed the behavior of anybody in the chamber? Because that's always, of course, been the great fear that cameras will change things.
It's always been the great fear. I didn't see anything any different. You know, there are a lot of characters in the House of Delegates, and I think they continue to be characters just like they were before. And
People started wearing makeup.
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Come on out.
Not sure
Are you all Twittering?
I'm not twittering.
You're not twittering. Are you
twittering?
twittering?
No.
It's when you don't have the time to think and blog. I mean, it's like,
governance,
I don't know.
I have to say, governance is much more open and
Yeah.
much more accessible to people these days than it ever has been, and that's both a detriment and a positive, because while a bill is being debated, you
Sure.
can have avalanches of people saying what they oppose or support of it, and in some ways, people delegates and senators need time to reflect and talk with themselves about a bill, and they might not have time to do that because they're just getting
And the
bombarded.
expectation is that it's going to be so public,
and the
too.
expectation
Yeah.
is also that you're going to respond exactly the way the constituent wanted you to in that email, and you might not be able to.
And so that anything short of that is a dismissal. That's interesting.
Exactly.
But you look what technology did for Jeff Frederick. I mean, it didn't exactly help him out this year. And I think, the GOP chairman is, facing a showdown because of, his relationship with a lot of people. I mean, you could see that bubbling up. I mean, when you go through and see that none of his bills even got a single vote in subcommittee, you're dealing with someone who's not exactly,
And twittering cost him.
potentially cost him some power in the Senate.
Right.
I mean, you probably know better than any of us what happened with Senator Northam, but I mean, I think that was one of the huge stories of the General Assembly session was the question of, Democrats struggling with their majority. I mean, it's not. I'm not trying to say anything bad about what happened, but. This is something. It's tried and true.
This was the
wherever
story
you
where
go.
Senator Northam was presumably coming to proposing or part of a conversation about a power sharing agreement.
Yes, he was.
Is that fair enough to say?
Yes.
Okay.
And that it set us back about 4 hours in the Senate, but it was all resolved quietly. Well, maybe not quietly, but peacefully, and the Democratic majority.
It didn't sound like it was quiet based on the
quiet.
blog entry here.
I think it's funny you mentioned Democrats in the Senate trying to figure out how to govern. I think in the House, for several years, Republicans were trying to figure out how to govern. It's one thing, Republicans feel very comfortable being in the minority because philosophically they're opposed to government, a large government, a lot of taxing. And so it's Republicans really like being able to criticize. Having to govern is a difficult thing, and I think Republicans in the House of Delegates had to learn how to do that. I think Democrats in the Senate were having to learn how to do that this year.
Interesting.
The second you get in the majority, it's herding cats.
And we're out of time, so next Friday night, when we come back to this conversation, we start with you to respond to that question.
I look forward to it.
We will reset that question up, and then we will get that response. That's why we have two sessions, and that's the way that is. All right. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and I'll be back in just a moment with a final thought. While states struggle with the financial meltdown, AIG Chief Edward Liddy found himself on Capitol Hill this week. He tried to explain that $165 million bonus package for a company which has made dreadful decisions and continues to perform poorly. Mr. Liddy says, sure, it's distasteful, but a contract is a contract, and if we don't pay up, we'll lose our talented staff. Besides, Mr. Liddy says, he's taken the courageous step of asking those who are in line for $100,000 or more to give half of it back. Well, the contract is a contract argument would work if it weren't for the auto and airline workers who, when told that their jobs were dependent on concessions, came back to the table and walked away with less. As for the good talent argument, apparently 11 of the 73 talented workers who are getting bonuses north of $1 million don't even work at AIG anymore. So much for retention. Besides, AIG is right now about the business of selling assets to pay us back. So it's not like there's such a rosy future, I suppose, for those employees who are left. And it's not hard to imagine they're just hanging in for the bonuses before leaping off a sinking ship. The question here is much bigger than bonuses, though. The question here, in part, is one of leadership all the way around. Mr. Liddy's comments on the issue betray a fundamental misread of AIG's circumstances and of the taxpayers who now own 80% of the enterprise. Instead of pleading with the bonus club to give half of it back, Mr. Liddy might have displayed some of that business genius we're told we must keep at all costs. He might have said, now look, those of you who have already left the company, instead of a bonus, you have our very best wishes. The rest of you, we aren't taking bonuses. The company is on taxpayer life support. It isn't the right thing to do. If any of you have a problem with it, come see us in court, and you can explain to your friends and neighbors why, when your country needed you to do your part, you chose to put yourself first. And lawmakers would be better stewards of the investment if they started objectively questioning at least two prevailing beliefs that seem to have brought us in part to this place in which we now find ourselves. One is that we have to have a bailout, and we have to have it now before we've even had a chance to read the deal. The second is the notion that some companies are just too big to be allowed to fail. Both approaches keep us from seeing all the possibilities there may be in these troubling times. That's it for us on this edition of What Matters. Here's a look at what we have coming up. We'll ride the bus to see whether Hampton Roads can develop the kind of transportation system that will let us leave a car at home once in a while. We'll check in with our expanding editorial roundtable, and we'll turn the Klieg lights on Hampton Roads to see how the region fares as a film location. We have some great shows in the works, and we'll be glad to send you an e-bit to let you know what else is coming. You can write to us and call us. Our website address is whatmatters.tv. You can visit us on Facebook. Email is a great way to stay in touch, too, at whatmatters@whro.org. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next Friday night as we continue our conversation about the General Assembly on What Matters. We'll see you then.